New leave rights will help women. New rights to share leave with the father of their newborn child will help stop women feeling they have to choose between having a career or a baby, Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg has said. The government is publishing the final details of a significant shake-up, which it hopes will, at the same time, cater for a growing desire by men to play a more hands-on role in a baby's first months. Reforms will also extend parents' existing right to request flexible working to all employees in an attempt to reflect the increased role of grandparents and other carers. Under the new system, the traditional 52 weeks of maternity leave, other than the first fortnight for a new mother's recovery, can be shared between the parents from April 2015. But in an effort to allay fears of the impact on smaller firms, bosses will have to agree any proposed pattern of time off and will retain the right to insist it be confined to a continuous block, with no more than 2 subsequent changes. Those safeguards were given a generally warm welcome by business groups, although the Institute of Directors, or IOD, said the changes posed a nightmare to already struggling firms. Anyone taking total leave of 6 months or less over the period would be legally entitled to return to the same job, while a similar role would be guaranteed for those away longer. Mr. Clegg confirmed that an initial plan to extend paid paternity leave has been shelved as unaffordable, though fathers will get the right to 2 days off, unpaid, to attend antenatal appointments. In other changes, the 18 weeks of unpaid leave per child available to parents of under 5s who have at least a year's service will be extended to cover those with children right up to the age of 18. The right to request flexible working patterns will be open to all employees who have done 26 weeks with the firm, rather than being restricted to adults, carers, and parents of children under 17 or under 18 if their child is disabled. It means grandparents could apply from April next year for flexible working to help look after grandchildren. Employers would be placed under a legal duty to consider requests in a reasonable manner. Mr. Clegg, who has dismissed the present system as Edwardian, said, "Women deserve the right to pursue their goals and not feel they have to choose between having a successful career or having a baby. They should be supported by their employers, rather than being made to feel less employable or under pressure to take challenging jobs. We need to challenge the old-fashioned assumption that women will always be the parent that stays at home. Many fathers want that option too. Many businesses already recognize how productive and motivated employees are when they're given the opportunity to work flexibly, helping them retain talent and boost their competitive edge. Under the reforms, rights to the full amount of shared leave will be made available to those bringing up a child born to a surrogate mother, and those adopting anyone under 18. Maternity Action Director Rosalind Bragg said the reforms were a useful but very modest step in the right direction. But she said the right to return arrangements were complex, unfair, and will confuse both parents and their employers, and that more needed to be done to encourage fathers to take up leave. The CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses, and the British Chambers of Commerce, or BCC, All said they were pleased that the government had listened to firms' concerns about being able to plan effectively around parental leave. John Wesnich, employment advisor at the BCC, said, "This response appears to offer pragmatic solutions, such as restricting the number of requests or changes to leave to a maximum of 3, as this will limit potential disruption for smaller firms. The requirements for parents to provide indicative plans for how they intend to use their leave will encourage early dialogue between employers and staff without reducing parents' flexibility." In sharp contrast, IOD Deputy Director of Policy Alexander Emmon said the changes would heap yet more burdens on struggling employers at a time when government should be freeing them to create jobs and wealth. The proposed system is considerably more complex and unwieldy than the current laws, and employers will, once again, have to absorb the cost of adapting and implementing this new system, he said. Moving the goalpost time and again provides an environment of gross uncertainty that small businesses up and down the country will fear. TUC General Secretary Francis O'Grady welcomed the shared leave, but said it was useless without being backed by higher pay. The government's own estimates suggest that just 1 in 20 dads would be able to afford to take shared parental leave if it was paid at the current statutory rate of just £137 a week, she said. By failing to give parents the right to return to the same job after 6 months, the government has also missed an opportunity to prevent a constant source of pregnancy discrimination, where moms returning to work find that their job has changed. The proposal will create confusion for employers and be a source of anxiety for women who decide to take more than 6 months of pregnancy leave. Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities, Gloria De Piero, said, "Nick Clegg claims to be on parents' side, but he and David Cameron had done nothing to support families in the last 3 years." This reheated announcement contains nothing new for families suffering from this government's cost of living crisis. It proves you can't trust a word, Nick Clegg says. Cost of living EU will be severe. Britain will pay a severe price if it votes to leave the European Union, Sir John Major has warned. Exit could cost billions, would leave the UK isolated internationally and yet still required to implement EU regulations it had no part in framing, the former Prime Minister said. Sir John, whose premiership was scarred by long-running battles with Tory Eurosceptics, backed David Cameron's strategy of renegotiating Britain's membership before staging an in-out referendum as the best way of finally resolving the Europe issue. The government needs to be realistic about what it can achieve in the negotiations, he said in a speech at the annual dinner of the Institute of Directions in London. Unlike other recent forays into the political arena, such as his call for a windfall tax on the profits of energy companies, his latest intervention is broadly helpful to the Conservative leadership, which supports continuing EU membership. It would be a truly dreadful outcome for both the UK and the EU if the result of the referendum promised by Mr. Cameron if the Tories win the next general election in 2015 is that Britain decides to leave, Sir John said. Of course, we would survive, but there would be a severe price to pay in economic well-being, in jobs and in international prestige, Sir John said. In a world of 7 billion people, our island would be moving further apart from our closest and largest trading partners at the very time when they themselves are drawing closer together. This makes no sense at all. Britain would have to negotiate its exit, which could cost billions, and then could find itself still having to pay for access to the single market. Norway, as a non-member, pays 80% per capita of what the UK pays as a full member, he said. It would still be obliged to implement EU regulations, but would be unable to defend the city or any other sector from harmful new legislation, while inward investment to the UK would fall away, according to Sir John. At the same time, the EU would suffer from the loss of one of its biggest economies, the long and historic reach of Britain's diplomacy and its most significant military power. The EU would be diminished. The UK would be isolated. I am no starry-eyed Europhile, but it would be a lose-lose scenario, a truly dreadful outcome for everyone, he said. Mr. Cameron is right to seek finally to settle the long-running debate over Britain's membership through a referendum, Sir John said. The European Union continues to divide public opinion in the UK. Even where it appeals to our head, it consistently fails to appeal to our heart. We need to sort this out. While Mr. Cameron's position is far stronger than many believe, Sir John made clear that the Prime Minister would need to play his hand carefully when it came to renegotiating Britain's membership terms. We need to negotiate with the grain of evolving views across the EU. We need to hoover up the allies that already exist on many issues. We need to be smart enough not to ask for the impossible. Sir John also used his speech to warn against Scottish independence and pour scorn on the SNP's plans to break away from the UK while still retaining the pound with the Bank of England as the lender of last resort. A currency union, which the SNP assumed is negotiable, would require the UK to underwrite Scottish debts. That will not happen if Scotland leaves the Union. There can be no halfway house, no quasi-independence underpinned by UK institutions, he said. Some fly past too hot for Comet Eisen. A comet from the fringes of the solar system does not appear to have survived its close encounter with the Sun, scientists have said. Images from NASA spacecraft showed Comet Eisen approaching for its slingshot around the Sun, but nothing coming out on the other side. In a Google Plus hangout, U.S. Navy solar researcher Carl Bentham said Eisen probably hasn't survived this journey. Phil Plait, an astronomer who runs the Bad Astronomy blog, agreed, saying, I don't think the comet made it. Nevertheless, he said, it would not be all bad news if the 4.5 billion-year-old rock broke up, because astronomers might be able to study the pieces and learn more about comets. This is a time capsule looking back at the birth of the solar system, said Mr. Plate. The comet was 2/3 of a mile wide as it got within 1 million miles, or 1.6 million kilometers of the Sun, which in space terms basically means grazing it. NASA solar physicist Alex Young said it would take a few hours to confirm Eisen's demise, but admitted things were not looking good. He said the comet had been expected to show up in images from the Solar Dynamics Observatory spacecraft at around noon Eastern Time, but almost 4 hours later there was no sign of it whatsoever. Maybe over the last couple of days it's been breaking up, he told the Associated Press. The nucleus could have been gone a day or so ago. Comet Eisen was first spotted by a Russian telescope in September last year. Some skygazers speculated early on that it might become the comet of the century because of its brightness, although expectations dimmed as it got closer to the Sun. Made up of loosely packed ice and dirt, it was essentially a dirty snowball from the Oort cloud, an area of comets and debris on the fringes of the solar system. 2 years ago, a smaller comet, Lovejoy, grazed the Sun and survived, but fell apart a couple of days later. That's why we expected that maybe this one would make it because it was 10 times the size, Mr. Young said. It may be a while before there's a sun grazer of the same size, he added. They are pretty rare, he said, so we might not see one, maybe even in our lifetime. Offered to destroy chemicals at sea. The Obama administration is offering to destroy some of Syria's deadliest chemical weapons in international waters using a U.S. government ship. The plan, still subject to final approval, would involve destroying the weapons, probably aboard the MV Cape Ray in the Mediterranean Sea, with U.S. Navy warships patrolling nearby. This approach would avoid the diplomatic, environmental, and security problems posed by disposing of the materials on any nation's soil. The Obama administration has used international oceans in other sensitive cases where land-based options were precluded. The U.S. Navy buried al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden at sea to avoid his team becoming an attraction for extremists. The government has been questioning terror suspects for as long as it takes aboard Navy ships since the CIA closed its secret prisons overseas, and President Barack Obama has refused to send more prisoners to the detention center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The decision to proceed with the chemical disposal plan would be made by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, a global chemical weapons watchdog agency with 190 member states. In a statement yesterday in the Netherlands, the watchdog agency said the effort to ship Syria's chemical arsenal out of the country continues to pose challenges due to the security situation on the ground. No country has committed to disposing of the chemical weapons on its own soil, which is why the U.S. offered to destroy the deadliest of the chemical components at sea is seen as a likely option. Jonathan Lely, A spokesman for the President's National Security Council stressed that no decision had been made regarding destroying chemicals outside of Syria. We and our international partners are pursuing alternative means of destruction, and we will continue discussing with other countries how they might best contribute to the effort, he said. We remain confident that we will complete elimination of the program within the milestones agreed upon. The MV Cape Ray would host the destruction of some of the deadliest of Syria's chemical materials using a process developed by the Pentagon but never employed in an actual operation. The U.S. would use what it calls a mobile field deployable hydrolysis system to neutralize the chemical material, making it unusable as weapons. The system was developed by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is an arm of the Pentagon. The titanium reactor uses heated water and other chemicals to make the chemical warfare material inert. Two of the hydrolysis units would be mounted on the Cape Ray. It will take some time to retrofit the ship and conduct training to ensure that the process can be done successfully at sea. Once the mission is finalized and the Cape Ray is ready, it would be transferred to control of the Defense Department's military. Once the mission is finalized and the Cape Ray is ready, it would be transferred to control of the Defense Department's Military Sea Lift Command. The ship is owned by the Transportation Department's Maritime Administration, and it would have a civilian crew. Officials expect to use U.S. Navy ships to provide an escort and security for the operation. There are already a number of Navy warships in the Mediterranean. Changing cigarette packaging will save lives. It may look like a U-turn or even an O-turn, but the government's change of heart on cigarette packaging will save lives, says the British Lung Foundation's Dr. Penny Woods. The UK government has announced it is looking at making it law for cigarettes and all other tobacco products to be sold in the same drab-looking packaging. However, most people already know that smoking is bad for your health. Every year, 100,000 people in the UK die from smoking-related diseases such as lung cancer and COPD. Will changing the packaging actually make any difference to the number of people living and dying with the effects of smoking? Tobacco companies clearly think so. Leaked documents show how they invest heavily in package design in order to reach out to specific target audiences, such as young people. And it works. Research has shown, for instance, that slimmer packs and eye-catching branding do indeed entice younger people to take up smoking. Packaging has also been shown to mislead people into thinking that light and mild cigarettes still exist, long after such words were banned for wrongly suggesting that there is any such thing as a healthier brand of cigarette. In short, cigarette packets are designed to make a deadly product attractive. The idea behind the new standardized packs is to break that link. But will it work? Again, all the evidence we have so far suggests it will. For instance, in 2012, a group of researchers reviewed every study conducted on the subject and found that standardized packs are less appealing, make health warnings more effective, and reduce the ability of the packaging to mislead consumers about the harms of smoking. We also have evidence from Australia, which a year ago became the first country to introduce standardized tobacco packaging. Experiences down under suggest that the law made people more likely to think about quitting, more likely to notice the health warnings on tobacco packets, and generally less likely to smoke. Many Australian smokers even reported that it made their cigarettes taste worse. Many Australian smokers even reported that it made their cigarettes taste worse. That just shows the power of branding. No wonder the tobacco industry are fighting so hard against changing their packaging. The evidence therefore clearly suggests that standardized packaging will help cut the number of people smoking, and if the law is introduced, I firmly believe that in time we will be counting the number of lives it has saved into the thousands, even millions. The sooner it is introduced, the greater the number will be. Boris Johnson. Equality will never happen. Some people are too stupid. Boris Johnson has encountered criticism for claiming that Britain will never be completely equal because some people are too stupid to be successful. Addressing the annual Margaret Thatcher lecture at the Centre for Policy Studies in London, he said that it was natural for some people to fail, but called for greater efforts, such as the reintroduction of grammar schools to help talented people overcome poor backgrounds. I don't believe that economic equality is possible, the mayor of London said. Indeed, some measure of inequality is essential for the spirit of envy and keeping up with the Joneses and so on, that it is a valuable spur to economic activity. Clearly placing himself as an heir to Thatcher's political legacy, he added, "Whatever you may think of the value of IQ test, it is surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85, while about 2% have an IQ above 130. He argued that greed was key in spurring an economic revival, adding that it would be wrong to prosecute the rich. The mayor's comments were lambasted by a familiar enemy in Nick Clegg, the deputy prime minister, using his weekly LBC radio phone-in show to describe the comments as unpleasant and carrying elitism. Mr. Clegg added that the use of the word species seemed to imply a view of people as dogs. Mr. Johnson, who is tipped by many as the frontrunner for the next Conservative leader, joked he had already been lambasted for making similar comments in a previous column from the Telegraph. Argentina weighs putting Pope Francis' face on a coin. Just a few days after Pope Francis decried capitalism, Argentine lawmakers weighed a new way to honor him, putting his face on a coin. A proposal to create a commemorative coin as a tribute to Latin America's first pope passed in Argentina's lower house on Thursday. Rep. Oscar Cachi Martinez said in a post on his official Facebook page. Martinez first proposed the measure in April, and it garnered approval from congressional committees earlier this month. Now the bill will be sent to the South American country's Senate for consideration. The goal of the coins, according to the text of the proposed law, is to commemorate an event of global dimensions, so our present and future generations remember this splendid act in the history of humanity, in which the principal actor is an Argentine. Beneath the Pope's vest, the coins would read, "Tribute from the Argentine people to Pope Francis." Catholic faithful across Latin America cheered the election of Pope Francis earlier this year. Even though about 480 million of the world's 1.2 billion Catholics live in the region, for centuries the Church's top job had gone to Europeans. That changed with the announcement that then Argentine Cardinal George Mario Bergoglio, who served as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, who'd become the new pontiff. Many Argentines were overjoyed, but the news was met with a more tepid response from President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, who sent a dry letter of congratulations that failed to mention that Francis was the first pope from Argentina and the Western Hemisphere. Several years before, Fernandez's government had sparred with Bergoglio in a notorious war of words over a gay marriage law the president backed. But since his election in March, Francis has made headlines by decrying the iniquities of modern capitalism, embracing the poor and people with disabilities, and reaching out to gays and lesbians. At the same time, the 77-year-old pontiff has sought to awaken a spirit of joy and compassion in the Church, scolding Catholic sourpusses who hone down rule breakers and calling out a tomb psychology that slowly transforms Christians into mummies in a museum. And Martinez says there's no doubt Pope Francis is already leaving his mark. To this Argentine who, for being a good pastor to his flock, especially to those who most need him, we all owe a great tribute. Martinez said in a post about the initiative on his official website, making the case for Argentina's lawmakers to act. We believe that the way of being, the charisma and the humanity of Pope Francis have managed to revive global sympathy for the Catholic Church, he said.